my friend. It's artificial intelligence. They don't converse in English, they converse in French. But conveniently, wanamweka kwamba anatoa story in very fluent English. It is artificial intelligence. Hakuna uongozi pale. Hiyo ni military government. It is a military government. It is not a civilian government. A civilian government utapata nafasi 2027 to make a decision in a civilian government.
Kenya calls itself a democracy, a beacon of East Africa. But if that's true, then why is it so afraid of a man from Burkina Faso? He has no seat at the AU. He wears no tie. He didn't win by votes. He doesn't speak in polished English. He simply walks with a rifle, a promise, and a quiet nation behind him. Yet that silence echoes louder than any summit. Because now, Kenyan officials are trembling. And one of them finally said it out loud. This man is a mirage, an illusion, a threat to democracy itself. But let's pause right there. If he's just an illusion, why are they so desperate to shut him down? Stay with us, because this story isn't about one soldier. It's about the fear that grips a government when the people start looking elsewhere. It happened at a funeral, a quiet crowd, a solemn stage, and then an eruption. Musalia Mudavadi, Kenya's prime cabinet secretary, stepped up to the mic, and instead of honoring the dead, he fired a shot heard across the continent. What you see online, those masked faces, those uniforms, that's not leadership. That's theater. That's fear. A civilian government, even when stained, is always better than a military regime. He wasn't just speaking about Burkina Faso. He was pointing clearly and deliberately at one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. And just like that, the gloves were off. Kenya had made its move. A democratic government, blood still fresh on its streets, had decided to discredit a leader thousands of miles away, a leader who hadn't attacked, hadn't insulted, hadn't even responded. So the question now isn't what did Traore say? It's this. What kind of government fears a man who hasn't even spoken? When a government speaks louder about a man in another country than about its own fallen citizens, you must pause and ask, what are they trying to distract us from? Because governments don't just lie, they divert. They wave their hands in one direction hoping you won't look at what's burning behind them. And right now something is burning in Kenya. Not just buildings, not just tires in the streets, but trust. The trust between a generation and their leaders, the last fragile bond, is being reduced to ash. In 2022, William Ruto rose to power, riding the hopes of the hustlers, the poor, the forgotten, the youth. He promised to end elite capture, to fight for those who sell maize on the roadside, who ride boda-bodas through muddy alleys, who eat only once a day. He was not the establishment. He was their revenge against it. But what do you call it when the hustler becomes the hammer? Because just 2 years later, the very people who lifted Ruto into State House are the ones being chased, tear-gassed, shot, and buried without justice. In June 2024, the finance bill dropped like a bomb, an avalanche of new taxes on fuel, on flour, on diapers, on sanitary pads, even on the internet. It was not just about the numbers, it was about dignity. You cannot ask a starving mother to pay more for cooking oil while your ministers drive in convoys of armored luxury. You cannot raise taxes on a student's Wi-Fi while your friends in parliament steal billions from healthcare tenders. And so the youth rose. It began with TikToks, then it became marches, then bodies, then coffins. By July 2025, over 100 young people were confirmed dead in clashes with police. Their names trended for a day, then silence, no trials, no accountability, just numbers added to a growing list of state victims. One protester, aged 19, was shot in the chest outside a supermarket. He had no weapon, only a phone and a cardboard sign that read, "We are hungry." Another 21 disappeared after tweeting criticism of the government. His body was found 3 days later, bruised, burned, tossed like garbage on the outskirts of Kisumu. And still the president stood at podiums and called this democracy. He called it order. He said Kenya must not become like failed states like Burkina Faso. But let us be honest. What kind of democracy kills children and jails artists? What kind of government beats the very people it claims to represent? The media has been muzzled, critical journalists fired, radio shows suspended, bloggers arrested under vague cybercrime laws. And a chilling message now whispers across Nairobi, don't mention the president, they'll come for you. Even former Chief Justice David Maraga, once a symbol of Kenya's rule of law, broke his silence calling for Ruto's impeachment, citing gross constitutional violations and betrayal of public trust. But impeachment means nothing if the system itself is cracked. Because what Kenya is experiencing isn't just political crisis, it's moral collapse. Unemployment among youth now sits above 35% according to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. A university degree no longer guarantees anything but debt. Hustlers are hustling more than ever, but for less than ever. Suicide rates among young men have spiked. Mental health services underfunded, ignored. Meanwhile, the political elite thrive. New highways are built to private farms. Luxury apartments rise in places where clinics rot. The gap between the rulers and the ruled has become a canyon and no bridge is being built. And in the midst of this unraveling, instead of fixing the crisis, the government points its finger outward. They say, look at Traore. They say, be careful what you wish for. That's a military regime. That's not democracy. But let's ask a simple question. What exactly is Kenya trying to warn us against? That if we look too closely at Burkina Faso, we might see ourselves. That if we watch Traore, we might start to wonder why our elected leaders are so allergic to action. That if we see a man in uniform build hospitals and ban foreign looting, we might start asking what our billion-dollar budgets are actually doing. Because here's the truth, Burkina Faso didn't send troops to Kenya. They didn't fund protests. They didn't hack anyone's election. They just existed. They just worked. They just showed a different model, one that's uncomfortable for anyone who rules by optics, not outcomes. Traore didn't speak at the AU. He didn't make threats. But his silence spoke louder than Ruto's speeches. While Ruto held forums with IMF directors, Traore held town halls with cassava farmers. While Kenya raised taxes to pay off Western debt, Burkina Faso rejected new loans and planted more sorghum. One country debates survival, the other is building sovereignty. And maybe that's why Ruto's administration feels threatened. Not because Traore has power here, but because he's waking something up, something dangerous, something irreversible. An idea that Africa doesn't need to beg to survive, that leadership doesn't need suits or votes to be legitimate only results. That maybe freedom isn't what the Constitution says. It's what your stomach feels. So let's be honest again. If a foreign president you've never met makes you question your own, if a farmer in fatigues rattles the halls of a billion-dollar capital, if one silent soldier terrifies a noisy regime, then maybe the problem isn't him. Maybe the problem is what they're trying to hide behind his name. He doesn't speak much. He doesn't attend global summits. He doesn't wear tailored suits or hire Western PR firms. He has no blue check mark, no entourage, no billion-dollar media machine behind him. And yet, his name is whispered in markets from Dakar to Nairobi. And when people say it, they do not say president, they say captain. Because something about that name, that title, that man feels different, not imposed, not manufactured, not inherited, earned. Ibrahim Traoré did not rise through ballots but through blood. Not in campaigns but in trenches. Not in press briefings but in silence. And that silence now speaks louder than any press conference Ruto could ever hold. But why? Why does this young man, barely 36, who governs one of Africa's poorest, most war-torn nations, terrify the political elite of Kenya, a country with skyscrapers, embassies, highways, and five-star conferences? The answer lies not in what he says, but in what he does. Let's begin with food. While Kenya imports maize and blames drought, Burkina Faso, under sanctions, under pressure, under threat, launches a $981 million food sovereignty program. Not from the IMF, not from France, not from begging, from within. He tells his people, we will plant or we will starve, but we will not borrow to eat. And they believe him. Tractors are dispatched. Land is redistributed. Wells are dug. Cassava is planted in ground where bullets once fell. And what begins as farming becomes something else, a spiritual act, a quiet rebellion. Because in a continent fed by foreign charity, growing your own food is a declaration of war on dependency. Now let's look at gold. While Kenya's elites secretly lease mines to multinationals, Traoré nationalizes every inch of Burkina Faso's gold sector. He expels French soldiers guarding extraction sites. He tells them, "You took enough, leave the rest to us." Within months, state revenue triples. Gold once stolen now builds schools. Hospitals once abandoned now open. And children once fed ideology now eat porridge. All without begging, all without fanfare, all without permission. That is the Traore effect. He doesn't need to speak. He is spoken of. He doesn't tweet. He is quoted. He doesn't march. But his walk through the dust of Ouagadougou ripples across borders. Because for a generation that has never seen African success without Western strings, he is proof. Proof that dignity is not a Western export. Proof that sovereignty isn't a speech, it's a seed. And in Kenya, that seed is growing. On TikTok, his face appears in protest videos, not as a call to coup, but as a question, why not us? On matatus, his slogans are painted in red, we don't beg, we build. In sermons, preachers quote him alongside scripture. As Captain Traore said, we must till the land before it tilts us toward death. He has become an idea, and that is what Ruto's administration fears, not the man but the momentum. Because how do you fight a man who never raises his voice? How do you crush a movement that plants cassava, not Molotovs? How do you jail a thought? You can't. And so the government tries to mock it. They say he's a mirage, an illusion, AI-generated hero worship. They dismiss his story as rural fantasy. But deep down they feel the tremor. Because when your youth start quoting a soldier instead of senators, when your protesters chant the name of a leader who feeds his people while you tax flour, when your citizens compare the silence of Burkina Faso with the screams of Nairobi streets, you don't just have a PR problem, you have a legitimacy crisis. And here's the brutal irony, Traore never asked for their attention. He never called out Kenya. He never even responded to Mudavadi's insult. Because real leaders don't clap back, they build forward. And that above all is what Kenya's regime cannot tolerate. In a continent where strongmen yell and do nothing, he whispers and transforms. In a world where aid is weaponized, he turns soil into strategy. In a time when democracy is defined by who wins elections, he redefines it by who lifts the poor. So now the choice is no longer about systems, military or civilian, it's about results. Who delivers, who defends, who digs, and the youth are watching. They see that Ruto flies to Brussels. But Traore walks through the fields of Bobo Dioulasso. They see that Ruto signs bills. But Traore signs deeds transferring land to widows. They see that Ruto speaks of GDP, but Traore speaks of grain. And in that contrast, hope is reborn. Not naive hope, but grounded, gritty, cassava-stained hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, Africa doesn't need to choose between corruption and chaos, between ballots and batons. Hope that leadership can be silent, serious, sovereign. So when Kenyan leaders panic, when they smear, attack, mock, and deflect, know this. They're not afraid of coups. They're not afraid of soldiers. They're afraid of something far more powerful, an African man who stopped asking and started growing. They were told to vote, so they voted. They were told to wait, so they waited. They were told, don't take to the streets, take it to the ballot. And they did, but nothing changed. So they rose, not with guns, not with mobs, but with TikToks, posters, whistles, and prayers. They rose with their school shoes still on, with backpacks full of notebooks and broken hopes, with signs that read, "We are hungry, not violent." They were Kenya's Gen Z, and they were told again to shut up. On June 25, 2025, in the heart of Nairobi, the police opened fire on a protest of mostly teenagers, not terrorists, not looters, students, coders, poets. They fell in silence. Bleeding in the middle of Moi Avenue. Some ran to hide. Others ran to help. Many never came home. The footage is still online, but the government says we are investigating. They've been investigating for months. The only thing buried faster than the dead was the truth. At least 115 protesters have died since the finance bill revolt began. But the real number higher, always higher, because it includes the ones found in rivers, the ones disappeared after midnight, the ones killed not by bullets but by fear. Fear of speaking, fear of tweeting, fear of simply being young and asking for a future. And while this unfolds, Traore says nothing. He doesn't call for protests. He doesn't appear on CNN. He doesn't mock Ruto. He just keeps walking head down, hands dirty, with cassava root and conviction. And yet, his presence is felt more than any president in Kenya. Why? Because he doesn't fight for attention. He fights for transformation. He doesn't promise reforms, he plants them. He doesn't go viral, he grows vegetables. And that contrast between the silenced Kenyan youth and the rising Burkinabe icon is now impossible to ignore. In Kenya, Gen Z cries, "We are hungry." In Burkina Faso, Traore replies without a speech by delivering food. In Kenya, youth shout, "We want jobs." In Burkina Faso, Traore doesn't tweet about employment, he gives them land. In Kenya, the youth are called thugs for marching. In Burkina Faso, they're called heroes for farming. And slowly across the continent, a quiet realization emerges. Leadership is not about the title, it's about the touch. Traore touches soil. Ruto touches microphones. Traore sits with farmers. Ruto stands with financiers. Traore walks with the poor. Ruto drives past them, escorted and blind. And that's why Kenya's streets are chanting Traore's name without him ever asking. He has become the mirror, the one that forces an entire generation to look at their own leaders and whisper, "You had the chance." He took the responsibility. He's not perfect. Burkina Faso still faces threats, hardship, insurgency. But every tree planted under his rule, every field reclaimed, every woman given a plot of land speaks louder than 10 years of Kenyan press conferences. Because in the end, the battle is no longer between youth and police. It is between faith and betrayal, between what could be and what has been denied. And Kenya's Gen Z is tired of denial. They want what every young person wants tomorrow. A reason to stay, to build, to believe. But when that reason is shot at, gassed, censored, what's left? A vacuum. And in that vacuum, Traore's image has risen not just as a man, but as a metaphor. He is not just the leader of Burkina Faso. He is the manifestation of every African youth's buried potential, every dream dismissed, every idea laughed at, every moment someone said, "You're too young, you don't understand." And suddenly, in the dust of Ouagadougou, they see someone who understands, who doesn't just listen but acts, who doesn't campaign but cultivates. So, what happens next? Do Kenyan youth keep dying while waiting for another election? Do they keep watching their future get auctioned off in IMF boardrooms? Do they keep apologizing for being alive in a country built to suffocate them? Or do they plant something of their own? Maybe not a cassava field. Maybe not a revolution, but a thought, a refusal, a belief that they deserve more than pain and patience. And if you're reading this, ask yourself, have you been silent too long? Has hope become too risky to carry? Because Traore is not coming to Kenya, but his shadow already has. And it stretches across classrooms, street corners, WhatsApp chats, and prayer circles. It does not yell. It doesn't even knock. It just waits for someone like you to answer. They say Kenya is a democracy. They say we voted, we have a constitution, we have courts, we have freedom. But what is freedom if it must ask permission to cry? What is democracy if it only appears on the ballot but vanishes at the hospital door, the police checkpoint, the morgue? If a young man dies in protest and no minister resigns? If a teenager disappears and no judge demands truth? If a president raises taxes with no mercy, then punishes those who speak? Is that democracy, or is it a more elegant domination, one wrapped in the language of liberty, one signed with pens of parliament, one aired live on TV, smiling, shaking hands with foreign donors as your child buries their friend? Traore never claimed to be democratic. He never asked to be called legitimate by the West. But let us ask, when was the last time your elected leader grew his own food? When was the last time your MP rode public transport? When was the last time your taxes built something that fed you, healed you, protected you? If that is democracy, then let's be brave enough to redefine it. Not as the right to vote once every 5 years, but as the right to live with dignity every single day. Because right now, the people of Kenya are not choosing between left and right. They are choosing between survival and silence. And maybe that's why Traore disturbs the powerful, not because he threatens democracy, but because he exposes its imposter. In the end, it was never about Traore. And it was never just about Ruto. It was about what kind of Africa we are willing to live in. An Africa where youth are told to vote, then get buried in silence. An Africa where freedom means starvation without complaint. An Africa where your dignity is taxed, your voice is criminalized, and your future is always postponed. Or an Africa that builds, an Africa that feeds itself, an Africa that stops apologizing for wanting justice, land, bread, and peace at the same time. Because you can't eat speeches, you can't heal with slogans, you can't bury the truth forever. You can silence a protester, but you cannot silence hunger. You can jail a poet, but you cannot jail an idea. And that idea is now walking through the streets of Nairobi, in graffiti, in sermons, in whispers, not imported, not imposed, but born here. Born in the soil of Bobo Dioulasso, born in the fire of Gen Z resistance, born in every African who has finally said no more. No more watching our leaders sell our futures. No more being told to be patient while they build prisons instead of schools. No more fearing those who swore to protect us. Because freedom is not given, it is grown. And if Traore reminds us of anything, it is that we don't need to wait for permission to begin. So plant something, speak something, stand for something. And if you're still unsure, still afraid, still questioning, then remember this. A man who farms in silence is still more powerful than a government that screams in fear. This is your choice, your moment, your Africa. And history is waiting. Will you rise or will you be ruled? Join the movement. Subscribe to Spirit of Africa. Comment below. What kind of leadership does Africa truly deserve? May truth, courage, and harvest be yours.